Welcome, everyone. This session is called The Intersection of Basic Income and Climate, Continuing the Green Resilience Project Conversation. I don't see anybody else saying anything in the chat. If you're here, say hi to everybody. Maria, hello. So my name is Sheila Reguer. I am the chair of the Basic Income Canada Network. We can deal with that stuff later. I'm going to go through a bit of housekeeping to start. I think most of you who have been in sessions before have heard this. Try to do it quickly. So this session is brought to you by basic income organizations in the United States and Canada, and with the generous support of our sponsors, the Gerald Huff Fund for Humanity, Humanity Forward Foundation, Aid Kit, and Steady. And I'm assuming that everybody has sort of figured out Crowdcast by now. Mitchell and I are going to go a bit rogue here. So, you know, the instructions tell you that there's a chat box and there's a Q&A box. We're going to be really flexible about this. We don't want to talk a lot. A lot of the project that we've been involved in is listening. So we want to hear the thoughts that people have, express them in the chat, ask questions, and please do. We really want this to be interactive. So as we talk, chat away, share your ideas, questions, anything you want, anywhere you want. Now over to Mitchell.
Thanks, Sheila. My name is Mitchell Beer. I'm coming to you from unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory, which you might also know as Ottawa, Canada. I am the publisher and managing editor of The Energy Mix, which is a news site and e-digest on climate change, energy, and the shift off carbon. You're muted, Sheila.
Yeah, you're on.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought, okay. I'm reading the notes incorrectly here. Okay. I am just going to very quickly go through the early background on how the Green Resilience Project came to be and some of the processes that we went through. And just to really reinforce what Sheila said, I don't want to hold forth at you for more than maybe 7 to 10 minutes because this is a short session and we both really feel the most important part of this will be when we actually get to the conversation. And that's very consistent with the way I hope, with the way we set up and then ran the project. Our original question going into the Green Resilience Project was whether worries about income security were really the unspoken obstacle in conversations that have been going on in Canada and elsewhere about a just transition of fossil fuels for us in the specific Canadian provinces and communities that depend most on fossil fuels. So if you hear as a Canadian participant, you know that's Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador, and there are about 24 communities that are essentially single industry towns or close to it, and dependent on the fossil fuel industry as it enters and moves through its sunset. We quickly realized that the same connection between income security and a just transition could also be incredibly important to communities dealing with the impacts of climate disasters like flooding, severe weather, drought, or wildfires, or even just looking ahead to those impacts in the immediate future. So we applied for funding from the Climate Action and Awareness Fund of Environment and Climate Change Canada, our federal environment department, to host a series of community conversations to not hold forth a bit, but to ask questions of community members about the intersections between income security, climate resilience, and a just transition off fossil fuels. And to our astonishment, and that's a longer story, we received the grant. Who knew? That led to a series of 33 local conversations with more than 900 participants in every Canadian province and territory except Nunavut. I'll share just a few aspects of how we set the project up and how it ran before handing over to Sheila to tell you about what we heard and the conclusions that we reached. First of all, we were only able to get this done, and we knew that, you know, we knew this going in and set up the project accordingly. We could only get this done by working with local partners, and that we would only realistically be able to ask those local partners to take part if our budget included sufficient funding that they could get the work done, not just the basic logistics of the session, but appropriately the listening and the outreach and the community work to make sure that the conversations were all that we needed to be. That funding was there so that they wouldn't need to do this off the sides of their desks, as so often happens in this kind of work, but that their work would be appreciated and compensated appropriately. We looked for a wide diversity in our partners and in the participants they brought together for the local sessions, and we were blown away by the extent to which that did happen. The partners included environmental organizations, anti-poverty organizations, former basic income pilot sites, a healthcare worker, a health policy researcher, Indigenous-led communities or organizations, a cultural organizer, 3 youth-focused organizations, a think tank, a community economic development organization, and a member-based farming organization. And of course, no, I was not able to say all of that in one breath. And it was really important to us that we did cover a range of urban, rural, remote, and Indigenous communities where specific needs, issues, opportunities, concerns all came to the fore. We were looking for and found partner organizations that could build on the work that they'd already done in their communities and the network they'd already built up, and then in turn use our project as an opportunity to extend and expand that work. So whether it was from the basic income security side or from the climate just transition side of the house, we wanted to be part of an ongoing conversation and help make that more effective, not initially at the level of just articulating the issues and the policies, and then actually lending the projects and the outcomes that would get communities the understanding of the services and support that are needed out there. We developed extensive guidance materials to try to just ensure that each of the projects hit its milestones, that we had the conversations that needed to take place and documented them appropriately. We set out a series of 4 questions, deliberately very open-ended questions that we hoped that our local partners would use to guide the discussion, but also with the very clear instruction that this was a starting point, not an end point, that we hoped that they would look over the materials closely, take away what they could use that was actually relevant to their circumstance or situation, and then adapt it accordingly. So for example, although we had envisioned conversations running, a couple of hours, a couple of our partners decided to morph that into short interviews and smaller conversations. And that worked beautifully in their context as well. The source materials are still available on our site, freely available, and we're already seeing people pick up that material in the hopes of using it for follow-on conversations that they organize. The discussion across the 33 sites exceeded our expectations, and the reaction's been overwhelmingly positive. We were told that this model was an exemplar for the way community listening and community participation should happen. And now we are actively, this is not a pitch, but just to let you know that we hope we're not going away. We are actively searching for funding for phase 2, both to broaden the conversation to a wider mix of communities and to deepen the conversation for the communities we've already been working with, because much to our terrible shock, it occurred to us somewhere along the way that this project was due to sunset March 31st, because that's our government's fiscal year. And it dawned on us at some point that neither income security nor the climate emergency was going to be solved by March 31st. Who knew? So we really want to keep going and keep on being of service and being a link in the chain to the communities we've been working with, and we hope more communities. That's more than enough from me. So over to you, Sheila, and looking forward to the conversation to follow.
Okay, thank you, Mitchell, so much. So Mitchell is the coherent one of the group here.
No pressure.
No, the pressure was on me. I warned Mitchell in advance that I'm kind of winging it in a way, because I'm kind of building on some of the conversations that we've been having throughout the conference and some of the key things that have come up. And I see already, like, there's an interest in transportation options and things. I have a lovely kind of strange, terrible transportation story to share, but that's later. I want to talk just about, I mean, if you look at the project, there were certain themes that came out based on the goals of the project. I'm going to narrow it a little bit and not talk about everything. My key focus is on our last goal, which was understanding, as Mitchell said, that this is a starting point. So it's a starting point for advocacy, collaboration, and more. So yesterday, somebody mentioned during one of the discussions, a reminder that we all talk about a basic income won't solve all of our problems, but it makes many problems easier. And that's one of the messages I think that's important to take forward. And among the themes, one of the key ones for me, and I guess I didn't thoroughly introduce myself, I am a policy wonk by trade before I retired and I've joined the basic income movement as a retirement career kind of thing. So one of the themes was looking to government for action because they have the power. So individuals and communities need the kind of big scale transformative policy that enables other actions. And for me, going into this too, I mean, I think these are two really big, wicked issues, the environment and the income security side. They also, we've been talking a lot about economics throughout the conference. I think they both represent the biggest, most fundamental failures of our current economic system. And that's to recognize that nature and nurture actually count. Our environment matters, our care economy matters, and all of the things that don't get factored into the market and profit margins. So based on that, so we listened. We heard what people were saying. We got lots and lots of recommendations, great ideas for people to adopt at community level. Some of them, very targeted to their own communities, whether their problem was rising sea levels or fossil fuel jobs. What we tried to focus on was the really big things, the big policy areas that had the greatest enabling potential to make big, fast transitions of the kind we need. So I will talk about those 4 recommendations just really quickly. So the first one is incorporate basic income into Canada's plan for a just transition, which is fairly well established, the just transition plans already. Design income security and climate policy solutions to focus on improving individual and collective quality of life. So that's what matters when you're setting goals. The third is empower people and communities with the tools and resources they need to build or strengthen resilience. And as I said, there are lots of different ways that, that people have solutions within their own communities that are going to be, real priorities for them. But some of the key resources that almost everybody talked about in some form or another were cash and time. People needed money and they needed time. To get a breather, to find the solutions in their community that are going to work, to find places where people can get engaged and be respected in the work that they're doing. And then the fourth was ensure corporations and the wealthy pay their fair share. So based on that, like I said, we're in such a strange time. It took a pandemic to get us to really focus on some of these things. And then we had some really interesting solutions and different ways of doing things that came out with emergency benefits and that sort of thing. And now we seem to be falling back into, well, that was a pandemic and we kind of hope it's over and maybe nothing like that will happen again until the next climate emergency or the next really bad recession. And now we've got inflation and war. So, these issues are still here. So we need to keep pushing. And that push has to be political in many ways. So I want to talk about what I see, I think, as there were lots of challenges that abound. We know what they are. I want to talk about what I see as helpful signs, particularly coming out of this project. So in one of the sessions yesterday, the day before, and I think throughout the conference, there's been a lot of discussion of framing basic income and what our narrative is. And I think the Green Resilience Project, because it talked about the linkages across income security, climate action, community resilience, because it went across those things, and deliberately, we took people out of their bubbles. So that meant that, some of the bubbles that get formed around basic income that often have to do with, like, it's just for poor people and they've caused their own problems, and the tropes around deservedness and that sort of thing. I think some of that got more muted, and there was a greater understanding and empathy maybe with people when you understand that people need resources and income to be able to tackle things like climate change, to be able to realize that your local economy is dependent on one industry like fishing, and if the fish can't survive, then your community is in trouble. So I think crossing over those bubbles and seeing the interactions across these things hopefully allow us to get out of narratives that have been kind of limiting to us and expand that. So I think it's also a way that basic income is important to help people manage these kinds of transitions. We're asking a lot of people, to deal with all of the stuff that life is throwing at us, and deal with the fact that if we don't do something serious about climate change, we're all really going to be in trouble. That, I think, strengthens both individual and community resilience and expands the options that people can think about and build capacity to do. I also think, in terms of the narrative exercise, there were so many powerful, powerful stories that came out of the community conversations. And I think, there's lots of other academic research and different things going on. I think this really helps people interpret what they're seeing in the data, provides a richness in understanding the intersectionality of different things going on in people's lives. Like one of the really interesting things is, like, we have basic income connections with food security, food insecurity, and that sort of thing. But with the Green Resilience Project, bringing together farmers, food insecurity people, direct practitioners working in food banks, and people who are struggling to develop community gardens and want to do positive, environmentally sustainable things, but can't because they don't have enough time. Bringing all of that together gives you a much richer narrative than dissecting any of those and looking at them bit by bit. So that's why I think, looking at all of these things matter, both in developing climate and income policy. I'm talking a lot, it seems. And try to speed up a bit. The next area I think that I see as a real opportunity is that I think already we've seen that it has expanded civil society networks with mutual goals. There are a number of organizations that in Canada that have both environment and income security as, part of the key priorities that they're working on. More and more people are looking at both of those things independently and now starting to join them up. We've heard of examples of people joining up just in communities that were part of the Green Resilience Project. We've been invited, from the basic income side have been invited into new spaces. So I think this whole working together for, social justice in all of its aspects is just tremendous. One of the key ones, Madeline, on, again, one of those other 2 days in person, was asked a question about the role of labor. And we know, like, labor has been really challenging in both of our movements to a certain extent. Um, we have some support for basic income from some unionized environments, and others are rather resistant to basic income. On the environmental side, what I've sort of seen is that, I mean, there's been a lot of focus in the just transition driven by labor to focus on people who are employed. I very carefully use words work and employment, meaning what they mean. People employed in the fossil fuel industry. And at a recent meeting, one of the labor representatives, talked about the tremendous pressure on fossil fuel employees who are making good livings and have established roots in communities and homes, and so much of their lives are going to be disrupted. And then a colleague of mine jumped in to say that, yeah, there's also other people out there who never had those opportunities in the first place. So I think we're connecting these things, I think, is expanding understanding for all of us of how so many people are implicated in different ways. And I think that can help us foster understanding going forward as well. The next one I want to talk about is government integration. I won't do a big spiel about that either, but really interesting. Mitchell mentioned that we got funding from the federal government. It came from Canada's Environment Department. We hadn't heard much of anything from anybody on the income security side of the federal government in quite a while. But as the result of this project and developing relationships on both sides of what we were looking at, we got the money from Environment Canada, but it was the minister responsible for income security programs who actually came and welcomed people to our launch activity. So, and we've had follow-up meetings. Both ministers have been responsive. Their staff have been great. Our staff that we hired for the Green Resilience Project have been super at, setting up connections. And now we're learning of more cross-government activity that's happening, and they're open to more partners and understanding from the credibility of our work that we have something to offer. So I think that's hugely encouraging. The last thing I'll mention is that polls in Canada, despite our disastrous, for most of us, Ontario election results that elected a government, but the whole election itself, it was like everybody was fatigued by COVID and everything else going on and weren't paying attention to things. There were very few issues of any import discussed during that election. Like, it was very strange. Despite that, polls taken around the same time showed that for Canadians, the things that were of greatest concern to them were the poverty, insecurity, social protection nexus, and the environment. So it matters to Canadians, it matters to people, and I think we have a lot to build on. So now,
Sheila,
yes.
before we open it up, I wonder if I could just do a sort of a quick pursuit on what you were saying about the conversation, the basic income conversation with labor organizations. As you point out, trade unions in Canada have been working hard on the just transition. There's also been a lot of really interesting conversation about the large majority of fossil industry workers who are very keen to bring their skills to another industry, and very often to clean energy industries. There's been a lot of conversation that if you're an electrician, and you're currently working in the tar sands because that's where the jobs are at the moment, you have the skills to be working on a wind or a solar project. The reskilling is minimal. People who work on offshore oil rigs, somebody from the UK was telling me the other day, just switch over to offshore wind, and with the opportunities available, it's almost that simple. And I don't have the technical qualification to say, okay, just report to work somewhere else on Monday. But so it's not that simple, but it's very, very doable. We're hearing stories of oil-filled services companies that are trying to recruit back their old workforces since oil prices began to increase again. And they're hearing from people they used to employ who are now saying, look, they're no longer asking how much it pays, they're asking how long the job works. Because they're in jobs now where they can actually stay home instead of routinely commuting across the country. They actually get to be with their families for a more extended period. They're in jobs that pay less but are more secure. And a lot of the people who were previously a part of that fossil economy are saying, well, I've actually got something better now. I've got a better life. So that those reports are somewhat anecdotal. There are some opinion data out there, but either way, the programs and the baked-in assumptions that we make about what work is and which industries create that work, the assumptions on the ground are shifting. And I'll just put in a word really briefly that there's been a lot of really hard work and good work going on within the trade union movement to hear that, align with it, support it. In addition to the challenges that you raise. So it's not an either or. It's this is a very much a yes and I think that's going on. Yeah.
Exactly. None of these sort of institutional frameworks that we're dealing with, trade unions, governments, bureaucracies, none of it is a monolith. One of the things I think we have noticed, though, is that the sort of more rank and file members of governments, of parties, whatever, tend to be very basic income supportive and very climate supportive, and leadership, the people who really have the power, a little bit less so. Mitchell, do you want to talk about because I've heard you talk about some of the transportation issues that we heard about. Do you want to talk about that?
I'll be happy to. Sure. I saw that question in the chat. Thanks very much, Carla. And I've been trying to sort of sit here, calm panelist on the exterior, but inwardly just racking my brain for anything I can remember seeing in our report that's specifically about transit. I know it's there. It's not in my head. I do apologize. Michael, you put up the link to the report, and thank you for that. What does occur to me is that what you were saying, Sheila, about cash and time, particularly the time aspect of that, I think is one of the entry points to how the kind of work that we did ties back to transit. First of all, on the climate side of the house, transit is absolutely, and electrified transit in particular, electrified micro transit within neighborhoods. All of that is an essential part of the transition off fossil fuels, and there are many transit agencies already across North America that are at different stages along the road in making that shift, at least as far as shifting the fleets off fossil fuels, shifting the fleets off diesel, which of course is a health benefit as well. How people get to make use of transit. Again, this is it's anecdote, not data, and even worse, it's somebody else's anecdote. But a couple of times now, I've heard the former mayor of Toronto, David Miller, who is now working with the C40 Cities Coalition, talking about somebody he spoke with. For those of you who know the Greater Toronto area, somebody he spoke with who lived in the far eastern part of town, had to commute across 3 bus lines to her job at Toronto Airport in the northwestern part of the city, and commuting across the northwest, which to some degree is a transit wasteland. And this was somebody who was not going to have time to participate in advocating for better transit. If she'd been able to afford a car, she would have been able to say, I don't have time for transit. I'm on, different means of transit conveyance 2 or 3 times a day, or 2 or 3 hours rather per day. So, given the choice, an internal combustion vehicle would have been a much better life option for her than being on transit, which is the better option in so many ways. So it makes so much sense to me that being able to count on a basic income would have shifted so many aspects of that story, would have meant that this person could actually be home with family at dinner time sometimes. And from there, might have just had the time and the space and the relief from exhaustion to start thinking, okay, so who is my city councilor anyway? And how good or abominable are they on transit access and on electrified transit? So I'm not sure how coherently I put that, but I think all of those issues joined together in a way that's really dysfunctional right now in most of our cities. And a lot of the time when we look at climate solutions, when the modeling is done, and there are a lot of different pathways, there's a lot of modeling that's been done on how we make the transition to zero carbon by 2050 or before. Usually it focuses on technology change, but not on the underlying social change that makes that possible. So for example, I know of no zero by 2050 model, might be out there, but I haven't seen it, that explicitly gets into not what is the technology we need to change our transit, but what are the policies we need so that people can shift to transit and have that choice and have that as a realistic option. So it's back to what you were saying a few minutes ago, Sheila, that on the ground, people know what we need. We know what we want. That came back again and again and again, and so powerfully and and eloquently from green resilience participants. We know what we need. We don't have the wherewithal to do it. We don't have the power. We don't have the authority. And it's the authority structures and figures that need to get with the program. I really hope that answered anything about transit. And yes, please look at the report.
Okay, and now before I go to Sid's question, I just I just really want to tell this like really silly, sad transportation story. So basic income is often talked about in terms of, oh, we can't afford it unless we get rid of public services. Otherwise, we won't be able to pay for it. So I have a story of like how backwards that whole kind of line of argument works, and it ties into the environment. So there is a city that is deciding now to take down bus shelters because unhoused people are using them for shelter. So we have a situation now where we have homeless people who are being moved somewhere. They may end up in parks where the police are going to come and route them out. They may end up in jails or hospitals, all really super expensive options. We have taxpayers who have already paid to build the bus shelters. Now they're paying to pull them down. And now they've got bad public transit because they're forced to sit out in blistering heat and blizzards and whatever, waiting for the bus, probably prompting a good few of them to decide to go back to driving their car. Nobody wins in this situation. So again, if you have a basic income, if you have options, if you understand the importance of public transit and you find ways to encourage it rather than discourage it, we'd all be in a better place. But we have to look at these things more holistically, like not one policy decision at a time, because that just ends up being disastrous. And now I will.
I'm just going to say, looking at it holistically, that was just the whole tone and feel of the conversations that took place through the project, because people were talking about what was going on in their communities. The question was not what should transit policy be. It was how are you doing? What's going on? A little bit more directed than that, but not so much. And that led to a very different conversation and the kind that we need at the policy level as well.
Okay, and now Sid's question. What was learned about how basic income and new green jobs might be coordinated? That's a good question, Sid.
Let's say stump the panel. No. Well, I guess the one thing that does, Sheila, do you have a quick sort of?
No, I think so.
Sorry. Go ahead. Okay. Well, back to how just the original question that we brought into the early process of developing the project. How does the just transition actually happen? How does anybody get to think through? Get the time and space to think through what their what next might be. And we were focused specifically initially within the fossil sector, but in any precarious job, including precarious or desperation entrepreneurship, frankly. If every minute is spent either managing what you're doing right now, or being exhausted in the job that you're in right now. And you have to keep going. You're exhausted, but there's no net. That's what you've got. And then, I'll just sort of do the sort of the typified response. We're here in Alberta, but I'm from Ottawa, and I'm about a just transition. I'm here to help you. Well, coming from Ottawa, we mean that very sincerely, and yet it's somebody else's livelihood that's on the line if we get it wrong. So, in what universe is it realistic to expect somebody in that situation to be able to just have the wherewithal to think it through? In other contexts, I've been there. Both things are true. I'm very uncreative, and I don't think it's possible. So, knowing that a basic income is there, that actually there is a net, and it's not just spin. There's actually something behind it. People actually have that time and space to think through what a better future might look like, and at that point, lots of choices and options open up, including green jobs, including, by the way, a job in a whole other sector. The conversation in Alberta so far has been, sure, we'll diversify our economy, we'll find the stuff before we ship it out. It's still dependent on a single commodity. Mm-hmm. So the next answer to that is, sure, what about green energy to replace energy that fries the planet when used as directed? Maybe the next conversation is, what are all the other things you would have wanted to do if working in the any energy sector hadn't been the only option available to you? Bunches of other things people can be doing if they just have the opportunity to think it through and get started.
Yeah, one other part of Sid's question that I think maybe merits some focus, and that's like, who's doing the coordinating and where is it being coordinated? And I think what we learned is that there's incredible diversity, but also creativity and skills and understanding within communities of what it needs to do things there. So I think, again, if we're looking at enabling policies, again, it's not Ottawa coming in and saying, oh, here's how we're going to coordinate this. It's enabling people on the ground who know the situations that they're dealing with better than anybody else. And then allowing for cross-fertilization of, like ideas that work in one city might be adapted to some other rural place, where they hadn't thought of this yet. So I think it really is all about options and enabling things to happen where they need to happen, and getting our governments working where they do things best. And the federal government does a really good job of, collecting and disseminating money. It does a really good job, unfortunately, of supporting fossil fuel industries lately, and it should get out of that business. Provincial and territorial governments or municipal governments or non-governmental organizations on the ground do better jobs at other things. We need to figure out how that all coordinates better. Are there surely all of you people must have other things that are on your mind and things that you want to say or share, or a particular experience that you've had, or things that you see in your own community that are related to the linkages across these subjects? Or is it late in the day and in some people's day? Well, it's late in the day for the Pacific people who had to get up at 6:30 this morning too, I imagine. The other puppy.
Sheila, I think everybody's captivated by seeing your
Yes.
puppy jump up on the couch and make it great.
Oh,
yeah,
he's gone now.
He's gone now. But I mean, we had a visitor.
Do a guard dog again soon. Anyway, I hope people do check out the Green Resilience report and the website and look at some of the tools. I mean, we did this obviously very much in a Canadian context, but what we've done is not limited to Canada. I mean, the diversity across Canada is replicated across the United States and everywhere else. There are so many common issues that people are facing. plus the individual community situations that they're living in. So do read. The tools are useful for everybody. We hope that people continue to have their own community conversations, town halls, spread the word, and keep building allies, which is another theme we've been talking about throughout the conference.
Keep building allies, just keep asking questions and capturing community voices.
Okay, so if there's nothing else, everybody's stymied, brain dead, I am. So I am just going to do a quick wrap up and thank you then, and talk for a second about what's next. So thanks everybody for coming. I wish it could have been a bit, oh, Mitchell?
Sorry, there is one more question from Michael about how central is carbon pricing in the discussion. Shall we?
Yeah, you go.
Okay, thank you. As folks on this line might know, carbon pricing basically took up all the oxygen in the Canadian climate conversation for years and years until it was finalized. And I would say both things are true. It is, I think that's the second time I've said that here, sorry about that, but carbon pricing is an essential tool in the toolbox. Pricing pollution and putting an accurate price on the pollution we produce can really help accelerate climate solutions, and it's not the whole story. We need a wider toolbox of options when you look at the modeling for the level of carbon pricing that it would take to really change behavior. We're talking about adding, in Canadian funds, $300 a ton, $250, $300 a ton. To the price of anything that depends on fossil energy, whether it's direct fuel or the energy that's embodied in the things we need, the things we buy. And even though it is very much possible, and it's being done in some places, including Canada, to try to balance that so that people in greatest need are not paying beyond what they're capable of. Anybody in this community knows, in the basic income community knows, if people are already right close to the bone, increasing the price of anything should not be on the table. So sure, from the top down, those price signals are useful, but this opinion is not universally held in the climate community by any means. But it has frankly been such a relief. Now that we're through that conversation, we're through that fight, to be able to look at all the other things that we can do that are enabled and made better by having a price on pollution. But that one policy step is not the whole story by any means.
Thanks very much, Mike, for the question, and Mitchell for the answer out of my wheelhouse. So thanks again, everybody. We are at time. Just to announce that, as with other Crowdcast sessions, the recordings are available basically as soon as the session ends, and the links in the chat you will see as well. So we are now actually very close to the ending of the conference, and the last plenary is called Rethinking Basic Income, Challenges to Universality and Uniformity of Payment. So my good friend Annie Miller from the UK, I believe, is part of that, and our dear iconic Evelyn Forget from Canada is part of that group. So I think that's going to be a really interesting session, and I believe Stacy or Mike will be giving closing remarks. And then everybody is invited to Kumo Space afterwards for a bit of social connection. If you can do that, I will be going off to my grandchildren's birthday party. Have a great day, everybody, and thanks for being here.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for being here.